6, I recognize the member for Orleans.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, it's an honour to rise today to speak to Bill 6, the Safer Municipalities Act, legislation that has sparked strong emotions, conflicting viewpoints, and I believe an opportunity for us in this chamber to take a more honest and balanced approach to one of the most visible and painful issues facing our communities today. At its core, Bill 6 is about giving municipalities and law enforcement the tools to manage public drug use and dismantle encampments. These are not abstract concerns. These are daily realities for people across Ontario. Parents trying to walk their children to school through a park lined with tents. Local businesses seeing customers driven away. And communities growing anxious as public spaces feel increasingly unsafe. And Madam Speaker, I want to be clear. I support the objective of this legislation. We must be able to remove encampments that are unsafe, unsanitary, and unsustainable. We must be able to intervene when public drug use endangers individuals and communities alike. In fact, Madam Speaker, when I was a city councillor in Ottawa, I led the way to ban smoking in public parks to ensure families could enjoy these public spaces without being exposed to secondhand smoke. And I hope that we can all agree that hard drug use is many, many, many steps above smoking. But, Madam Speaker, the legislation does not exist in a vacuum, and it is our job as legislators to consider not just the hammer, but the hand behind it. So let's start with some hard truths. Homeless encampments did not exist on this scale before Doug Ford's government was elected. Before 2018, the number of visible, large-scale encampments across Ontario was negligible. Today, they're everywhere, from downtown Toronto to Sudbury, from Niagara to the nation's capital. In 2023 alone, municipalities across Ontario documented over 1,400 separate encampments, a dramatic increase that reflects a deeper, more serious erosion in our social safety net. And it's not just anecdotal. According to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, more than 80,000 Ontarians were homeless at some point in 2024, a 25% increase since 2022. In northern and rural Ontario, these rates have exploded, growing by 150% and 200% respectively over the last 8 years. And while this government blames municipalities or Ottawa or anyone else within arm's reach, let's not forget who cancelled affordable housing projects, who underfunded mental health care, who allowed rent control loopholes, and who still, after 7 years in office, does not have a coherent provincial homelessness strategy. Madam Speaker, we cannot talk about enforcement without talking about what happens after. If all this bill does is give police the power to clear tents and confiscate personal belongings, but leaves people with nowhere to go, then we haven't solved the problem. We've moved the problem from one park to another, from one underpass to the next. Now, this government has touted its recent commitment of $75 million for homelessness and housing supports. But let's put that in perspective. That's about $5 per Ontarian. Madam Speaker, we spend more on highway billboards than we do on shelter beds. But it's not just about the money. It's about leadership. Where is the provincial coordination to ensure encampment removals are paired with immediate shelter options? Where are the wraparound mental health and addiction services? Where is the investment in deeply affordable housing? Not just attainable homes no one living in poverty can afford. Now, Bill 6 allows officers to escort people to support services, and that's great. But it only allows that if it's enabled by regulation. So let me ask the government, where are those regulations? Where are those services? Don't tell Ontarians you're offering help while writing a bill that's all stick and no carrot. And, Madam Speaker, it is entirely possible and it's necessary to hold two ideas at once: that public spaces must be protected and remain accessible for families, seniors, and our communities, and that people living in tents are not criminals, that they are often in pain, people in crisis, people who have been failed by the very systems that are supposed to support them. So yes, we must restore safety to our public spaces. And yes, we must crack down on illegal drug use when it threatens lives. But we also must confront the truth that many of those struggling with addiction are, in fact, self-medicating for trauma, for mental illness, and because of despair. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, this government has spent more time vilifying those living in encampments than supporting them. And in doing so, it risks making the problem worse, not better. Now, Madam Speaker, while I have laid plenty of criticism at the feet of the Ford government, let's also speak honestly about the hypocrisy of the NDP, because time and again we hear them lecture this House about compassion, about equity, about human dignity. But let me tell you what happens after question period when the cameras are turned off. NDP members of provincial parliament and city councillors across Ontario vote against new shelters. They oppose infill housing developments, and they organize against housing developments in their own backyards. They call for action, and then they fight it when it arrives on their doorstep. Now, while I was on council in Ottawa for a decade, I saw this over and over and over again. I saw this from some of the members who now sit in this legislature. Housing developments along main streets voted against because the brick was the wrong color or it was 1 story too tall. Shelter beds that were voted against because shelters are not as good as permanent housing. And, Madam Speaker, I would agree. But shelter beds are a lot better than living in a tent or sleeping on a sidewalk. And for decades, New Democrats in this legislature and on city councils across the province have stood in the way of incremental progress that has unfortunately helped lead us to the situation we are today with housing. You cannot claim to care about homelessness while voting against the very solutions that give people somewhere to live. You can't claim the moral high ground while contributing to the housing gridlock that makes housing more expensive and keeps people on the street. Because, Madam Speaker, real leadership means saying yes, even when it's not popular, even when it is hard. So, Madam Speaker, while I support the intent of Bill 6, I am calling on the government to do 4 things. First, I would like the government to table the accompanying regulations immediately so that people can be escorted to actual services, not just removed from site. 2, I would like the government to commit to real funding for municipalities, because municipalities are the ones tasked with enforcing the bill. Otherwise, we risk turning this into yet another unfunded mandate for our cities and our law enforcement agencies. 3, the government must publish a provincial homelessness strategy. It should have clear goals for housing construction, mental health supports, and addiction recovery programs. These things should not be treated in silos. There needs to be horizontal coordination with a comprehensive strategy. And, Madam Speaker, 4, the government must rein in the Ontario Land Tribunal, who keeps overturning municipal efforts to build housing in favour. They keep overturning those proposals in favour of NIMBY appeals. Madam Speaker, the question about Bill 6 isn't whether or not it goes too far. The question is whether it goes far enough in the right ways. Because I think, honestly, we all want the same thing. We want safe communities for our families, our kids, our neighbors. We want clean public spaces that we pay for with our taxes, and so that we can enjoy a high quality of life. And we want a society that doesn't turn its back to those in need. Bill 6 is a step in restoring order. But if it's not paired with compassion, if it's not paired with investment, and if it's not paired with real vision, then it's only a half measure. And half measures are what got us into this mess in the first place. So let's dismantle encampments, yes. But let's also dismantle the barriers to housing, the barriers to treatment, and the barriers to dignity. We can be tough on crime, we can be compassionate, and we can do both of those things at the same time if we choose to. Thank you, Madam Speaker.